we did tankathon for the NHL. I don't know. Is now an appropriate time to do a tankathon for the NBA? I think it might be because, Paul George announced on his podcast that he's going to be shutting down the show for the foreseeable future, which we'll get to here in a second because it's batshit crazy. Let's go over to tankathon for the NBA. As of right now, the Sixers would keep their pick. They have the 6th worst record in the NBA. They need to continue losing. They have lost 9 straight games. They're 1-9 in their last 10. All right, let's sim the lottery. Will the Sixers keep their pick or are they going to lose it? Let's say they stay right at 6. I guess you would take that. Listen, ultimately, I think we can all agree the best thing for the Sixers is to lose because this team is going nowhere this season. Embiid's knee is a serious concern, and Paul George is a concern in and of himself. Get that top 6 pick. And I've been saying it consistently, and I'll continue to say it. For the love of God, please get rid of Daryl Morey. Please fire Daryl Morey into the sun. We are so beyond time for Daryl Morey to be gone. At this point, I don't know how anybody could try to rationalize him sticking around. Now, a thing came out a couple days ago, and this is me kind of transitioning to the Sixers briefly, and then we'll probably end up coming back to the Flyers, and we have some other stuff, and there's the NFL writer spat. But, I somehow got balloons going up. Good for me. There was a really big announcement that was made earlier this week, and I think that we owe it to this player. We owe it to this guy to give him credit. Paul George went on his podcast, and he was brave. He was truly, truly brave. Paul George announced that after some consideration, he's going to be stepping away from his podcast, at least for the foreseeable future, that he's going to be shutting it down a little bit. And I want you to hear from him why it is that he says he's going to be stepping away. So let's go over to Paul George here really quick because Podcast P. Let's hear what he's got to say.
Fellas, it's no secret. This season is up to this point, man. It hasn't been what we envisioned. I know my goal when I first signed with Philadelphia was to bring a championship to these amazing fans here. I still remain positive about that, and that is still the case and where I'm coming from.
Okay, so we had a little bit of pander there. The great fans of Philadelphia. We love Philadelphia, don't we, folks? A little bit of pander. Wanted to bring a championship, wanted to make the playoffs, thinks that it's still, that's a really unfortunate place for me to pause it, but still believes that there's a possibility. Okay.
With that being said, though, I want to let the Podcast P family know that after today's episode with Dwight, I plan to take a break from the pod just to focus on getting my body right.
So he's going to take a pause on the podcast to get his body right. Do we assume that means he has not gotten his body right to this point in the season?
Getting mentally right.
Was he not mentally right already?
And, help this squad make a push towards our goal to finish the season out, give ourselves a chance to be in contentions to compete for a championship.
Huh? Wait a second. I don't know what day he recorded this. Okay, this dropped. This started going viral on Wednesday, the 26th. Now, maybe he recorded this over the weekend or he recorded it even earlier in the week. But remember, on Wednesday's show, we broke down his comments where he said, we don't look like a team. We're not a team that has the right habits. We're not a team that competes. Like, we're not a team. Like, he fucking shredded his team, which I respect. I know people took some umbrage with what he said, but I love when the athletes are actually fair and honest about their team. So he shredded his team post-game earlier this week that they're not a team that will compete for a playoff spot. They haven't shown the right habits. They just don't seem to have it in them. And then this clip drops like a day or two later, and I want to be fair here. He might have recorded this clip, before he went and spoke to the media post-game, and maybe it's just kind of out of order. But we're going to go back over to Paul George real quick. Go ahead.
I won't front. The desire to get back to shooting in person with my guys as well is the forefront of, this hiatus as well. I look forward to us three being back together and doing this as we once started this. So We'll be back on that note. Be sure to lock in with us because we got some big things in store in our future. In the meantime,
wow. Okay, so we're just going to stop there. So I have no issue with Paul George having a podcast. I have no issue with any of the athletes right now with podcasts. We've broken down Micah Parsons' podcast in the past. We talked about Big Play Slay going on that show earlier in the year and kind of seemingly shading CJGJ, and that probably caused a little bit of an issue potentially in the locker room. In fairness, like Draymond Green has a show, and a lot of guys have shows, and that's fine. But the optics of this, with how Paul George has played this year, and the timing of it, of him kind of going out of his way to say that, I need to get my body right and get my mind right. Like, I don't know. Am I old man yelling at clouds if I say, like, he should have done that earlier this season? Like, listen, doing a podcast isn't in and of itself the hardest thing. Like, what I do, where I'm the only person responsible for any of it, all right, like, that's still not that hard. Now, we have video guy Amadeo who does a great job, and he loads up all the socials, and he loads up all the channels, and we're bringing in a lot of subscribers that way, which is great. And without him, I would be lost in this world because I used to have to do all that stuff myself. So he's been a huge resource. But, like, Paul George isn't doing that, right? Like, the guys on his show are probably the ones responsible for coming up with the rundown. There's probably a team that does all the editing. He goes in, he's the talent, he talks into the microphone, and then he pieces out. I don't know how often Paul George does a show, but just conceptually, like, getting on a mic, spending an hour, 2 hours doing a show should not inhibit him from being the best player he can be. So it's weird, and like the optics around it aren't great. And then national media, of course, jumped onto it. Like Stephen A. Smith jumped all over it, was very animated, was very Stephen A. about it. And I want to get over there really quick because Stephen A., you never have to worry about him having things to say. And who knows, maybe he's going to run for president at some point because that's been going around. And he's been doing the rounds about a potential presidential run. But first, let's go to him and Rudy Gay from, I think this was yesterday. Let's hear what Stephen A. had to say about Paul George and about him needing to step away from the podcast to get his mind and his body right.
What I would do is I'd have sat down for the rest of the year because the Sixers are trash. They're horrible. Mm-hmm. They're awful, yes. Primarily because of the health of Joel Embiid. Without him, you're not going anywhere anyway.
Yo, by the way, this up top, this is fantastic. Paul of Duty. Oh, I love it.
And as a result, if you're Paul George, you're only putting yourself and taxing stuff from your body that you don't need to be taxing. You got 3 years to go on a max 212 deal.
So to be clear, as we're dropping in on this clip, Stephen A. Smith clearly believes that based on where the Sixers are and what's best for the Sixers, which is getting that top 6 protected pick, Paul George, instead of shutting down the podcast, should essentially be shutting down Paul George, the basketball player. And I have to say, I kind of agree. Like at this point, Paul George can't really do anything over the last 20 whatever games to go out and like change people's opinions of him. He can't really do much to change the opinion of the greater Delaware Valley and whether or not he was a good signing or not. It probably would have made more sense for him to kind of shut down the basketball side. Now, in fairness, if he weren't playing and we're still doing the podcast, it probably would have a more negative impact on the public perception of him as a human being. So maybe he shuts down the podcast and he's in and out of the lineup for the remainder of the season, but he's not putting hard minutes on his body. But we'll go back out to Stephen A.
Okay, prioritize the next 3 years. This season is done. You ain't winning a damn thing. You ain't getting nothing out of this season. Go home, get yourself right, and be ready for next season.
I think the exact opposite. I think he needs to go out there. He needs to play with those guys, get a good feel on how to play, and Embiid will be out. I think when Maxey is there for the future. I think he needs to play. He needs to play and become the Paul George we know.
Wow.
He turns 35 in May.
Ooh.
He turns 35 in May, bro.
Here. That's what we do.
No.
That's what we do.
Wait. He got to be ready for the next 3 years. And oh, by the way, last point for you, L. Josh Harris, I want to make sure everybody understands.
This is a good spot.
Josh Harris, the owner of the Sixers, is also the owner for the Washington Commanders.
This comes back to, if you remember, not that long ago on this show, I pointed out the fact that Josh Harris, when he was hiring down in Washington with the Commanders, Bob Myers, former architect of the Warriors dynasty, sat on an advisory committee, on an advisory hiring committee. And now let's let that, he doesn't mention Bob Myers' name here, but I want you to hear what Stephen A. Smith has to say about the front office with the Sixers now that we've set the context about Paul George, about this lost season, and about the fact that he probably should shut down because they want that top 6 pick. All right, let's go back out.
Who's the co-owner in his group? Magic. It would happen to be Irvin Magic Johnson. And if you Daryl Morey, I don't know whether it's true or not, but if rumors are correct that Josh Harris told you he was leery on giving Joel Embiid a max extension, and you said, Daryl Morey, it had to be done. If those reports are true, change is coming to Philadelphia. It's just a prediction.
So, in fairness, I think that the rumors are getting louder. And it seems like, from multiple national media pundits, the rumors around Daryl Morey's seat as president of basketball ops is getting hotter and hotter and hotter. And if you're a Sixers fan, I think it's a great thing. Because, again, what has Daryl Morey won? Nothing to this point in this league. He has not won a championship. He has not led a team to the NBA Finals. Friends, it's time to move on. And it's time to move on before it's all over.